Hey everyone, and welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. We got a special one in store for you today. I'm joined by the legendary Sam Taylor, who just took on an exciting new role, and we're excited to dig into some of his best practices and learnings.
Stoked to be here, Ross. Thanks a lot, man.
Of course, of course. Well, before we get into the tips and tricks and everything, I figured maybe we'd spend a bit of time talking about your personal journey through sales leadership and a bunch of awesome companies. If you don't mind, maybe doing a quick intro, 30, 45 seconds, some of those highlights, and then, we'll dig right in.
Awesome. Happy to do it. Been on this B2B SaaS sales game for decade plus. The gray hairs will show if you're watching video. And I'd say, really formative years. Started my career at Salesforce in a sales development capacity. I stumbled my way into Dropbox as one of their first 5 sales reps and viewed that almost like my undergraduate degree in SaaS, and held a number of different roles, stepped from an AE role into leadership during my time there. Joined a very small company called Quip. Think of it as Notion before Notion was cool. And we were gobbled up by Salesforce along the way. So back to the mothership I went. And then over the last couple of years, I've been leading the sales, success, and global support teams at Loom. And that was up until a couple of months ago, where I just joined a small startup called Endgame as their CRO. So that's the journey so far.
I'm noticing a theme here, from maybe some of those bigger businesses to smaller. And one thing that I'm excited to dig into specifically with you, Sam, is the perspective of, I think, this newish movement to revenue ownership versus maybe sales or CS or marketing. So looking forward to getting your perspective on that. So curious, I get a lot of questions about this from a lot of maybe managers or directors making that leap to that VP level or CRO level. What do you find the hardest part of going from maybe managing a team or an organization to owning, that whole department, or, for you, the whole kind of revenue organization?
It's not going to be anything crazy. Communication is hard, and human beings need communication to feel seen, heard, supported, and to do their best work. And I'd say one of the key learnings for me is it's easy when you've got the structure of your calendar that leads to, you've got your weekly team meeting or whatever cadence that is. You've got one-on-ones with all of your direct reports, and in a frontline manager role, like, that's the squad. You can go and reinforce those things multiple times with everyone that's kind of rolling into your team, versus you start moving into multi-department, multi-org, and the onus or what I found is that you just have to be a lot more intentional in terms of, one, repetition doesn't ruin the prayer in terms of things that you're talking about strategically. And we joked during our time as an exec team, particularly at Loom, of just by the time we're starting to get blue in the face saying things repeatedly is probably when the broader team is just starting to absorb and, like, frankly, get it. And so finding ways to make sure that from a strategy and execution, like drumbeat, that's carrying through. But I also think it's really hard to build relationships when you've got a massive organization. And so finding ways that, whether it's skip levels, one thing, newsflash, I was at Loom, and every Monday morning I'd have a weekly Loom, and the contents of that would be the majority of, like, what was I up to over the weekend? What was I doing with my family? And particularly in a remote environment, it's tougher to kind of manufacture those serendipitous run into at the coffee machine type moments with a broader global team. And so how do you sprinkle some of that in along the way too?
Totally. I love that. And it definitely resonates, the repetition piece, I think, both in terms of management, but also customers and sales. You live something, so it feels so natural to you. And that's the lens that you're looking at the world through. But the rest of your team and your customers aren't thinking about that 100% of the time. So really important. For the communication part, maybe to dig in there a little bit more, where do you think most people get this wrong? Is it to your peers? Is it managing up, or is it managing to that larger team, given the fact that you might not be that frontline leader anymore?
It depends on the size of your organization. And I'd say, like, if you, particularly at Loom, let's say, or even at Endgame, but it's a smaller company, if you've got folks that are sitting in different disciplines, so in this case, it could have been revenue operations, sales, CS, support, to your point around, like, who is or isn't living, breathing, a certain way or a certain lens through which they're looking at the business or their day-to-day. Part of that translation exercise, which I think is so key, is making sure that everyone has an understanding of where they fit into the broader strategy. And so really, I think that actually means empowering and having a strong relationship with your functional leaders so that they're not only getting an understanding of how we're operating and what the plan is at the business level or company level, but then how can they really distill that down and be that champion slash advocate for their org. And I think that translation exercise of where do we fit in, where do we belong, and how are we helping drive this company forward, no matter what your discipline is at the company, that's the challenge.
Totally. That broken telephone between departments and functions is always funny. It's always so much further than you would ever imagine. Like, oh, but it seems so obvious for me, but I think everyone's feeling that same way, right?
Yes.
So then it is obvious. So being that connective tissue, yeah, it's a definitely a different job than leading your own function and, you know, getting and taking what you need from the rest. So
yep. And it's not personal. Like the fact that you're not, air quotes, heard or understood the first time you say it, like totally. That's something that I think is a lesson along the way of like, no one's intentionally not listening, or we hope not. And if that is the case, you know, really, how do we make sure that it becomes more of a drumbeat across the entire team?
Totally. Well, let's transition away from some of those more leadership learnings to the strategy and execution of sales and a revenue organization. I know, appreciate you thought about some 3 tactical tips that we're going to share with the audience today. If you don't mind, maybe walking us through those at a high level, and we'll pull out some examples so people listening in can start using them maybe later today or tomorrow with their revenue org.
Awesome. Let's do it. So the 3 I came with are getting to a no quickly is a win. And really what that means is around tight deal qualification criteria. The headline I would say is like, I view any sort of opportunity or deal that you're working as a project that you're committing to, and you're trying to have multiple people that you're pulling into that project. So how do you have everyone on the same page of what's a good use of our time? Second one is around activity auditing. And what I mean by activity auditing is looking specifically at your champions and users in either a pre-sales cycle or a proof of concept of some kind. What's actually taking place with those users and with those champions. And so when I think about that tactically in a forecast or deal review, it's making sure that we've got tangible movement that's happening, particularly with your champions helping you sell and navigate internally. But also if there's any sort of trial or free usage mode, if it's product-led or sales-led, making sure that people are speaking with their actions, which I think are more powerful than words. And then last one is around executive alignment, and how do you systematize bringing your subject matter experts and executives from across your company to help your sell, put your leaders to work.
Totally. I love that. Well, maybe to practice what we just preached in terms of, hammering that drumbeat of what we're trying to share, maybe in reverse order, because honestly, this is one of the most underutilized techniques that I see out there. That's been for me as both a seller and a leader, the most impactful is executive alignment. Making sure you have a sponsor who feels some sort of ownership over the deal, and making sure that you're distributing different leaders, not just one who's managing those accounts, and making sure your customer feels heard at different levels. A great way of multi-threading and getting to those decision makers. Love that. Number 2, translation, making sure your champions are really champions. They might have the right title and be the right persona and say the right things, but like you said, if they're not following through in terms of both how they're helping you navigate the deal or other people using the product, you don't really have a deal, especially in 23, when people are going to have to fight tooth and nail internally, not just you to get a deal done. You need to have those validated champions. Or back to number 1, you're wasting your time, making sure that you're getting that no early on. Honestly, since, in general, deals are harder to come by, it's really counterintuitive. I see a lot of people trying to spend more time on more deals right now because they want to spread their bets. But I think it's almost the opposite. There's very few people that are willing to spend right now. So you need to spend all of your time on fewer deals, maximizing those, because there aren't as many opportunities out there, despite it maybe feeling like that. So love those 3. And we're going to dig into some examples. Maybe as a quick, kind of prequel to figuring out how to do these things consistently. What do you think most revenue leaders do wrong when it comes to driving consistency and predictability with deal execution? We can talk to, we're blue in the face about all the right things to do, but I think personally the hardest part is that consistency around it. What do you do, and how do you think about making sure that as you're scaling out the team, everyone understand what great looks like, and how they're doing that on every deal at the right time of that deal.
I think this is where there can be slippage if there's not rituals that are built in consistently. And what I mean by that is, like, if we're talking super tactically, it's like, what is going to be the consistent rubric through which you are running your forecasting and your deal reviews? And depending on your organization structure, that's not necessarily you as the leader in with that team every single time. And so really, how do you have it so that there is a consistent roll up that is required across your frontline managers in tight partnership, typically with sales ops, rev ops, whoever is actually coming up with these systems and processes, but ensuring that it actually gets live time in terms of readouts, if you want to have there be a health score of some kind. But an old adage, inspect what you expect. And I think the thing here is, many folks that I see will say these things and say, hey, we want to have standardization, or hey, this is the way that we want to do it. But then it falls flat on the actual, when it's time to really do the where are we at from both a deal org segment level, those things begin to fall apart and are kind of put into a broader paste of how you're looking at those things. And so really, I think it points back to you as the leader of, are you being consistent, and are you allowing yourself to provide that to your team? And I think for anyone that's looking for a way to move quickly within a company or within their segment or function, knowing what's expected, like clear expectations of them, is the way that they can go, one, I know I'm doing my job. Two, I think I'm giving myself a best option or a best ability to go and execute and perform well. And having a very clear understanding of those guardrails is so important.
So let's get really tactical here for a second. What is a good cadence? Like, let's just say, we'll throw out some numbers, because obviously a good answer is it depends for all this stuff. Let's talk about deals that are, high 5 figures, low 6 figures. We're talking mid, upper mid market, not enterprise, not transactional. How often should, a seller who's working multiple stakeholders, executive linemen, all this good stuff, be communicating with that front line and maybe skip level all the way to the VP, how deals are going, and inspecting this stuff? Is this daily? Is this weekly? Is this bi-weekly? What do you think, a rough optimal cadence is of deal inspection?
Deal inspection, I would say weekly until you're entering into the last third of your deal cycle. Like, once you're starting to get into, like, we are driving towards that air quotes moment of, we're kind of beyond like verbal go, no go with your champion of like, hey, this is a project, we believe in this, but we're starting to get into how are we going and navigating, to your point, in 23, a gnarly internal sales and budgeting conversation regardless. And I think that that's where you want to be increasing the fidelity and frequency of your cadence to probably twice a week, just because so much can be happening as you get into that action window. Of course, once you're over the hump, like you've got things, air quotes, signed, sealed, and you're heading towards kind of how do we execute across getting signatures and that sort of thing. Again, the fidelity goes even higher, where those are usually daily updates that are happening, particularly if it's coinciding with, an end of month, end of quarter, whatever compelling event that you're driving towards. And so it gets more potent and intense the closer you start getting to that cycle. And to the point earlier around qualification, like, in order to warrant that level of scrutiny, team selling, et cetera, ensuring that everyone is on the same page from a qualification perspective of everyone feeling like this is effort well spent. That doesn't mean that you're going to bat 1,000 and close every single one of those deals that chips over that threshold. But at the end of the day, everyone up and down your leadership chain should feel like this was a good use of time, regardless of the outcome.
Totally. And let's talk about maybe that first 2/3 that you mentioned before you get into commitment, project qualification, top executive priorities. What are some of the objective things that you're looking for from that inspection, from that rep, of saying these things are true? Do you have like your standard that you bring to every company? Hey, these are the 3 things and these are the 5 things, or how does that change? How do you think about that framework for helping translate what's in your mind to the sellers to qualify deals effectively?
Yeah, so it's not a straight rip and replace, because the one thing that's always going to be interchangeable, so to speak, is going to be, one, if you have a more technical product, for example, at Endgame, like there are different systems that we're integrating with, like, are those a match for what we're offering or not? Like there's more of a like check the box, don't check the box of like, great, do we have a viable prospect here based on the way that they're thinking and the way that their systems approach? So we'll take that off the table. The part that is consistent though is what are we doing in terms of champion building? And ultimately, when I look at that, like those questions are going to be around who have they brought in to the conversation that we didn't have access to before? Major flag if that's not happening.
Yep.
The second is, does the rep now have a, for lack of a better term, glossary of how does this champion and how does this business talk about their business and their customers? And if we're not speaking in their language,
Yes,
it's really difficult for us to go through and drive a business value conversation that is compelling and feels tailored to what they're doing. And so a lot of the early fact finding is really around the vernacular and the common translation of, we may talk about the way that we interact with our customers and prospects at Endgame in one way. That's likely not the case for the businesses that we're trying to sell to.
I love that. Yeah, I love the translation to their language. Basically, can you take your framework for a business case and customize it, and you could talk to the CXO
Yep.
and wow them with your understanding of their business. Like, they must have talked to us. They must really deeply understand our business to even have this conversation, use those words. I think that's so powerful. And I think there's great talented reps out there that still don't understand, and sales leaders don't understand the power of the small words, the little things that completely change the kind of the risk tolerance, I think, of people making decisions today. So I love
absolutely. And there's the adages of like, show me, you know me, and all those sorts of things for trying to engage. But ultimately, like, you want to be viewed as a partner.
Yes.
And again, if we're taking the framework of, if you are working a deal, like this is a project and a partnership that you're trying to drive towards. And a huge component of that is going to make sure that both parties feel like they are engaging in a mutual outcome. And the language component of that is huge. We'll get to it, I think, in a minute, but also the executive alignment piece of this. It's like, how do people feel supported, and how does it feel as though there's an equal match on both sides of effort and outcome that we're trying to drive towards?
Totally. And that's, I think, a good tie to the first qualification as well as the action audits. Are we getting these things done? Are we getting that information that we need?
Yep.
But yeah, let's jump to that, because honestly, a topic that I'm really passionate about, that I'm glad you had on the list. Systematic. This is not just exec sponsorship. This is the important part. This is the predictability, the way at the certain part of the sales cycle to engage the right executives and the right opportunities.
Yep.
How do you do that? How do you make sure that new opportunity comes through? The rep doesn't have to think about this and make a whole new process, ping on Slack, hey, this is all the context. How do you make sure that you're building that into the sales process? As we both know, that's a big difference maker in terms of win rates.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you need to come to your executive team and pitch them or drive alignment on, here's the threshold. It could feel arbitrary at times. It could be deal amount. It could be segment that we're focused on. It could be new product launch, whatever it may be. But what is the key qualification criteria for access to your exec team? And so you're trying to build trust across your leaders of, when we ask to pull you in, it's because you're needed and there's a strategic reason why across the business.
Yeah.
The second is going to be around probably twofold. It's or two different vectors. One's going to be relationship mapping. And if there are folks that have strong personal or professional relationships with someone that you're selling into, that might trump or change who is getting pulled in and for why. But I do find that typically having there be folks that are aligned with the key executive from both a, not only altitude within the organization, title, if that makes sense, but ultimately, like, are they naturally going to be speaking the same common language? Not necessarily in terms of how they talk about their businesses, but how they think about their responsibility and how they think about running a company. And that's the special sauce, right? Is where, for myself as a leader or sales rep, like, holy smokes, I don't want to be talking. Let these folks go have a meaningful conversation that allows them to hopefully bond in a very genuine and authentic way, but also deeply understand one another. And it's when you have that shared understanding, a bunch more information starts coming out the other side of those conversations that's actionable or insightful for the rest of your deal team. But also, it's going to feel like a true partnership when we're coming back and trying to push things across the line. And you've had someone that is there in the moments where there isn't a specific ask other than helping.
Totally. Yeah. So standardization of process. What is the deal size? What's the segment? Do we have alignment across the executive team to do this in the first place? Makes it a lot easier than those ad hoc asks. And second, what I heard was that stakeholder mapping or alignment of the right level and level of responsibility so that they feel like it's an organic conversation, not a sales conversation. And what I heard at the end actually is my favorite part, which is when it's not an ask. The time to do this is not, hey, we need to get the deal done signature you guys need. It is, hey, we're working on the problem. We want to validate that everything that we've heard with these other people is correct before we really, get to that next thing. That is a great time to get that alignment, or else it's going to feel, the whole purpose of the executive alignment isn't there.
Totally. Now there is a massive side benefit internally that I can't speak highly enough, and that is building customer empathy across your leadership team internally. There are a lot of folks in other functions that just have never been in customer facing roles that way, or sales feels like a bit of a air quotes black box of, I don't understand it. Like, what are these mechanisms? What are these terms? There's a vernacular component there too. And so bringing hopefully a diverse and cross-functional set of folks in a very repeatable way, one allows them to feel that shared sense and shared ownership of how do you go and drive business outcomes, because ultimately, like, no matter what you're building, eventually you do need to have it underpinned with strong business fundamentals, and that should apply and be top of mind for any executive that you have at the company. And then there's the other piece where sales is hard, people, and getting other people to see that as well and have a little bit of empathy there too, I think goes a long way as well.
Yeah, at tech companies, I know I felt this, during my career at Stripe. I think obviously valued sellers and customer facing people there, but it's not the same, right? When the executive team and with other senior leaders are made up of the majority folks that have never been in a customer facing role, seeing it, feeling it, that pressure, the outcome driven stuff, especially in those intense conversations, really helpful at building that empathy and getting the right decisions made. Product strategy, all that good stuff, right? I've seen decisions made purely off of those calls that are really big wins for the customer at the end of the day. So love that. Well, before we jump to the rapid fire questions and my favorite segment of our pod, here's to get your take on what the biggest gap is when it comes to teams' ability to partner effectively with champions. We talk a lot about this. We've already talked a bit about this in today's session. What do you think the gap is for a lot of sellers and leaders out there for getting on that text level, relationship with your customers, really speaking their language? I think still when I hear people have champions, I see they're not high enough level or they aren't really following through in things. Where do you think people get this wrong or think they're building champions, but it's not really quite at the level that you need it to get some larger deals done?
Yeah, we covered a little bit on like the influence, like can they actually take action internally? I think the piece that is most difficult to get to, it's not going to be just because you're getting text messages back and forth. Like, do you have a deep understanding of how this person is personally motivated to do this? Like, are you going to make this person
spending time with a potential vendor when this isn't a thing that's brought to them to have to get done now, right?
There's that, but also like, are they going to have that? Is there a compelling reason why they are going to push internally? And it could be, hey, they think that they are going to be a change agent and this is something they can hang their hat on. And like in the most simplistic version of it, like, does this person get promoted if deploying your solution and it goes really well? Like, are they setting themselves apart from their peers, or are they driving strategy in a more meaningful and high level way across the company? Like finding ways where it's clear that either this person is experiencing the pain so deeply that like you are unlocking and making their life so much better by deploying your solution. That's great. But in the carrot versus stick component of it, I think having a carrot that you're uncovering in an ideal scenario of you're really teeing this person up to be a hero internally in some way, shape, or form. And that could be to their cross-functional peers. That could be to the executive that they're rolling into. That could be at the company level, depending on what segment you're selling into and the complexity of that organization. But it's that personal component. And are you actually getting to a level where it's not just business solution, but it's also personal to that level for their career?
Yeah, I've never heard it put in that way. I think a gap for myself, and I'm thinking about our team now, is we've done a really good job of speaking that language at the company level.
Yep.
And building that business case and the quantified ROI and something we'd feel really comfortable bringing to the CFO or board.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, who's going to push to get it there, and not just present it, but it's going to come back. There's going to always be that friction, especially now. What's going to push that through? What's going to be that reminder? Oh, I hear you. You know, the leaders, executives, whatever. Okay, I really get it now. I can feel the visceral reaction from this person.
Yep.
And not just having a why behind the deal, why now, but for the person. I really like adding that as an inspection question and making sure that we can answer that before we get to a later stage of the deal.
And for you as the person listening, that's the individual person driving this deal, the seller, so to speak, whoever's quarterbacking this deal, you're not going to get to that level of understanding with the person on the other side of the table, so to speak, without trust and vulnerability in some way, shape, or form. And so I think a huge portion, and in a world that is heading towards all the AI, who's losing a job, who's getting automated out of everything, like actually building authentic connections with folks. And I think that there's a huge component of that around going back to deal qualification. Where do you tell people like, nah, we're actually not a fit. I would love to close this deal down. Trust me, I got a quota, but like, we are not a fit for you for XYZ reason. Like, and many of those deals will come back of like, that was a misinterpretation, whatever it may be. But leading with that individual and that business and their success top of mind, and finding ways to continually prove and earn their trust is ultimately how do you get to that level of relationship where you have an understanding of what their motivation is.
Yeah, I love that. Something that comes to mind is just reframing questions, right? Like maybe you're doing qualification and it can feel like you're looking for all the things that look like a good deal. Ask it in the opposite way and see how your customer responds. Say, hey, it's sounding like you're actually fine with this stuff. You have a pretty good system and systematic way of closing deals on your team and doing account planning. It usually only makes sense to buy a core when that's the case. But not like, can you help me understand that? Or, is this not a fit? That direction, and maybe they say it, and then maybe it's not a fit. You just saved yourself, like you said, lose early, or you just built so much goodwill because you're not hunting for, the quantified pain and how you're asking questions. You're almost leading from a disqualification to make sure you're not wasting their time and to make sure it is a fit. And those little things, I think that I see the best reps doing, and that's how they build great relationships with their champions.
And ultimately, you're coming from a place of act like you're already in the end zone, like act like you're like there's edges of like you're already above quota. You should be approaching every conversation like you're already at 200%, and don't need the deal. And that flows through in terms of the type of questions and the lens through which you're approaching those conversations.
Totally love it. Well, let's move on to the last piece. Again, one of my favorites, the rapid fire responses. We're going to get through about 6 or 7 questions. You ready, Sam?
Let's do it.
Awesome. And we're looking for one word or one sentence answers. First one, main reason most teams miss their ARR goals.
Truly qualified pipeline, not big enough. You need a big pipeline. It solves everything.
Totally. Favorite resource related to revenue leadership, a book, a podcast, a course.
Really loving the 20 VC podcast. There's a sales community that's there. And on the back end of it, there's a bunch of sales leaders that engage and help one another. And that's been great.
Awesome. Number one challenge in 2023 for revenue leaders.
Target setting.
Yeah. Not great historicals there.
I'll just leave it at that.
Best segment to go after, SMB, mid-market, or enterprise?
You're asking me which child is my favorite. It's not fair, Ross. I love them all equally, but I do find that the intersection of enough of a prioritization exercise and also enough deal complexity, mid-market is where I find myself spending a lot of time and enjoying it.
Totally. Most important org, and this also might be picking your favorite child as a revenue leader across all these functions, new business sales, customer success, or marketing.
It's a soft spot. Where'd you grow up? And I'm coming out of the SDR corporate sales ranks at Salesforce back in the day. So I got to rep sales, even though all functions so important.
Totally. Best way to unplug from the demands of revenue leadership.
Get outside. Go be in open spaces that are bigger than yourself. Think a little bit. Put a screen away.
Get grounded. Love it. And last one, the road for successful revenue leadership is paved with
authenticity.
wow, what a great way to end with a very authentic sales leader. Sam, this was really helpful. A lot of things for myself to think about to bring back to the team, which is what I always get excited about with these. Hopefully others are thinking through changes that they can make in areas of focus. So appreciate you taking the time. And if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Hit me up. Email's easy. LinkedIn's easy. Sam@endgame.io, but LinkedIn message away. Come hit me up.
Awesome.
People would love to chat.
Awesome. Appreciate the time, Sam.
Ross, thanks for having me.